Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today, Mirat Hashem, Daf Zayin Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn halachos Kapayim. We pick up today on the very bottom of Daf Zayin Amid Aleph, Siman Kuf Chav Ches Sif Lamed. Says the Mechaber, Mi sheyesh loi mum befanav oy biyadav. An individual Kohen who has some kind of a blemish on his face or on his hands. And now we're going to discuss what kind of blemishes we're talking about here. But Misha Yeshloi Mum Befanav Biyadav, a Kohen who has some kind of a blemish on his face or on his hands. Kigoyin, for example, Shehem Buhakaniyos, they are spotted, and we'll go into that in a little bit greater detail shortly. Ay akumais, or they're bent, ay akushais, or they're twisted. Says the Ramah here in the parentheses, buhakaniyos. What does spotted buhakaniyos mean? Pirush, the explanation of that is min nega lovan. It's some kind of an affliction, a skin affliction that has to do with white spots. Varashi Piresh, Rashi in Masechtas Megillah explains this as lentelesh balaz, which seems to mean some kind of tiny lentil-shaped white spots. Akumais, bent, kfufais is some kind of, his hands are bent. Akushais, twisted, litstadein, to their sides. Varan Pirish, the Ran explains akumais. What does a yadav akumais mean? That his hands are bent. Shenis akma yadai achiranis. Somehow, his hands are bent to the back. Akushais means she'ena yachal lechalik etzba'osav. His fingers are unable to be separated. I don't know if that means that there's some kind of a growth, a skin, maybe attaching their fingers, almost like a webbing. Or maybe physically he just can't separate his fingers. I'm not sure. But any of these kind of mumim, says the Mechaber, loy yisa eskapav. A Kohen who has any kind of affliction of this type cannot duchen. Why not? Explains the Mechaber, mipnei shaha'am mistaklin boy. Because these types of mumim are going to draw the attention of the tzibbur. And the tzibbur is going to be distracted by these mumim, and instead of paying attention to the duchening, instead of paying attention and having kavana for the Birchas Kohanim, they're going to be distracted by these various mumim. V'hu adin, and so too says the Mechaber, l'mi sheyesh mumin baraglov, somebody who has a mum on his feet. B'makom she'olim l'duchen b'loy batei sheikayim. If it's in a locale where the minig is that the Kohanim go up to the duchim without wearing socks, so then if this person has a mum on his feet, again, it's going to draw the eyes of the tzibbur, it's going to distract the tzibbur from Birchas Kohanim. V'chein, similarly, misha riroy yoyred al zekanoi. If somebody has a problem that somehow he can't control drooling, and he's drooling down and it's running on his beard, he can't duchen. Or if he has his eyes uncontrollably tearing. In all of these cases, these are things that are going to distract the tzibur from paying attention to Birchas Kohanim, and these people cannot duchen. V'chein suma be'echad me'enav. So too somebody who's blind in one of his eyes. Now the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain, we don't mean somebody who is just visually impaired and therefore he can't see out of one of his eyes. That's not going to distract the tzibur. We're talking about somebody who there's visible damage to the eye, maybe because of an affliction, maybe it's some kind of a cataract and the eye is glazed over, or somebody wears an eye patch, but there's something going on with one of the eyes which is visible. There's some kind of a visible problem with one of the eyes, and again, that's going to be a distraction. Lo yisa eskapav, these people cannot duchen. However, says the Mechaber, in all of these cases, v'em haya dosh be'iroi, if this person is already well known in his city, the word dush really means like threshing. I think the reference over here is that he's in and out of the city all the time. Everybody knows him. He's around. So everybody is familiar with him. If everybody is used to him, and everybody is very familiar with that defect. Everybody's very familiar with it. They see it all the time. Then Yisakapov. Then he could duchen because it's not going to be a distraction. Everybody knows him. Everybody knows him. They're used to seeing him. It's not something that people are going to look at. Oh my, what's going on? Everybody's used to it. So then it's not a distraction. In that case, even if he has an affliction that's affecting both eyes, he can duchen. Everybody's aware of it. Now, the question the Mechaber now deals with is, what does that mean? Kol im haya dash be'iroi. How well acquainted do people have to be with him? How long does this individual have to have lived in the city so that we say that people are used to it? So the Mechaber brings down here from the Trumas Hadeshin, and I'll tell you the halacha, and then I'll tell you where the Trumas Hadeshin gets it from, and it's going to remind us of something that we learned not all that long ago. Says the Mechaber from the Trumas Hadeshin, V'chol sheshah ba'ir shloishim yom. Once somebody lives in the city for 30 days, mikre dash be'iroi. That's already called that people are used to him. What is the Trumas Hadeshin based this on? Interestingly enough, the Trumas Hadeshin bases it on the halacha of Mishnah Berurah. How so? Because just recently we had Pesach. Now we stopped saying Mishnah Berurah Marid HaGoshem. Nusach Svarad says Marid HaTol. Nusach Ashkenaz doesn't say anything. And we learned the halacha. What happens if after Pesach somebody davened and he has a suffix whether or not he said Marid HaGoshem? Now, if he said Marid HaGoshem, he has to repeat Shemon Esrei because he inappropriately was Masker Geshem out of the season. So he's got to go back. If he finished Shemon Esrei, he's got to repeat Shemon Esrei. So the halacha is it depends. If it's within 30 days of Pesach, so then we figure that he followed his old habit. His established habit was to say Mishnah Berurah Marid HaGoshem. If it's already more than 30 days after Pesach, then we say he already established a new habit, and the new habit is to omit Mishnah Berurah Marid HaGoshem, so he's okay. So the Trumas Hadeshin says, what do you see from that halacha? You see that it takes 30 days to establish a habit. Says the Trumas Hadeshin, he's medama inyan le'inyan, and he says, how long does it take for somebody to establish a habit that he's used to seeing this individual with his physical defect, and it no longer serves as a distraction? 30 days. If somebody's around in the city for 30 days, already people are used to him. So, the first thing that the Mechaber said over here is that Dash Be'iroi, if you're well known in the city, so then your physical defect is not a distraction, and you could duchen. What's called Dash Be'iroi? If you live in the city 30 days. Now, the Mechaber qualifies that a little bit. And he says, first of all, V'dafka Be'iroi. That's only true if you live in the city and you moved to a city to live there, and you were already there for 30 days. Then those 30 days makes you dash be'iroi, and we say that you could do it because people are used to the physical defect. But that's v'dafka be'iroi. That's only in the city that you live in. Aval im hoylech ba'akroi le'ir acheres. But let's say somebody went for a sabbatical. Somebody went for a vacation, right? So somebody lives in New York, and he went to L.A. for a vacation, and he's in L.A. for 30 days. If somebody went happenstance, he went on a vacation to somewhere, a different city for 30 days, loy. That does not make him dash be'iroi in that city. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain to us the reason for this. The Mishnah Berurah is going to say, if you go to a city as a toshav, if you move to a city to live there, you go to the grocery all the time, you do your banking all the time, you have one shul that you daven in all the time, you live there. You're part and parcel of the fabric of society in that city. and therefore you're dash be'irai and people get used to you. That's not the same way you live when you go somewhere on vacation for 30 days. 30 days might be a long vacation, but your involvements are not there. And you do not become a part of the fabric of society in the place where you're going for a vacation. You're only a temporary resident. You don't get involved in the shul politics. You don't get involved in what's going on in the city. You don't set up bank accounts. You're not going to the bank all the time. It's just a different type of involvement. And therefore, people are not going to be used to the defect, even though the individual might be there for 30 days. So that's what the Mechaber says over here. Dafka be'iroi. It's only in your city, in his city where he lives, that if he's there for 30 days, we say people become accustomed to his physical defect. But if somebody goes on a 30-day vacation to another city, then we do not say that people become accustomed to his defect after 30 days. Another qualification. However, even if a person did not go to a city to live there, somebody went to a town to become a rebbe or to serve as a sofer, or some kind of a laborer, shana or chatzi shana. Somebody lives in New York. He heard about an opportunity in Pennsylvania where they need a malabid in a small town in Pennsylvania for 6 months, or they need a cipher to outfit the town with mezuzahs. He could go there for a few months, or some kind of a mishares. He's becoming some kind of a laborer, but it's temporary, right? But in this case, this is not a vacation. See, the Mechaber is giving me 3 different madregas over here. Madrega number 1 is you live in a city. If you live in a city, you're part of the fabric of society in the city. After 30 days, we say people are accustomed to that individual's physical defect. He could duchen because he's not going to serve as a distraction. You went someplace on a vacation, that's the other extreme. You went somewhere on a vacation, then even if you're there 30 days, they don't become accustomed to you because you're not a dweller. You don't really live in the city. You don't become involved with the people in the city. And therefore, if you duchen, you'll still serve as a distraction. Now there's a middle case. The middle case is this person went to this city not to live there, but it's also not just a temporary vacation. He went over there and he's going to be there for a significant amount of time, and he has a significant involvement. He's going to be a rebbe, he's going to be the sofer, he's a worker in the town. That person is dash be'irai after 30 days, and he could duchen chashiv dash be'irai b'shloishim yom. He becomes dash be'irai after 30 days, and he could duchen because he will not serve as a distraction. Let's take a look at some of the Mishnah Berurah over here, and then I want to see a couple of biur halachos. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Kovches, Shehem buhakaniyos. That was the first mum. The first affliction that we learned about in the Mechaber was somebody whose face or his hands are buhakaniyos. They're spotted with some kind of a white affliction. Says the Mishnah Berurah, first of all, you should know that when the Mechaber says that this person has a mum, bifanav oy biyadav, his face or his hands, kigoin shem buhakaniyos, it's going on both, the face or the hands. Koi gam apanav. This person has small white spots, either on his face or on his hands. And those spots of now he's talking about a different affliction. Says the Chavetz Chaim, those people who are spotted with small spots, shekorin zummer sprenkelin, sounds like summer sprinkles. This sounds to me like freckles. If such a, I don't know if you want to call it an affliction, or if such a feature is common in that area, then even if it's not roiv of the people of the city that have this, he says kapov, he keduchen. So in other words, if freckles is something that you frequently see, it doesn't have to be roiv b'nei or ear. But if it's somewhat common to see freckles, so then we're not afraid that a kohen is going to go with freckles, is going to go up to duchen, and he's going to be a distraction. Well, he's freckles. Someone's going, wow, look at that guy. Well, He has freckles. So you never saw freckles before? So says the Chavetz Chaim that if that's common in a certain locale, so then it's okay, he could duchen. Kuf Tes, the Mechaber said that the reason these people can't duchen is because mipnei shaha'am mistaklin boy. People will look at him. He's a distraction. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kofteshu who davar hamasmiya, because it's like a wonder. People never saw anything like this. Somebody goes up to duchen with a significant physical defect. He has some kind of a twisted hand. If you could see his hands, and we'll discuss that later. If he's holding out his hands and you could see his hands, people are going to look. They're going to say, "Wow, you see that guy's hands?" And then they're not going to pay attention to the duchening. That's the problem. Shu davar hamasmiya. It's going to distract their minds from paying attention to Birchas Kohanim. And we learned that the recipients of the bracha, the tzibbur, they have to be mechaven to the bracha. Like we said yesterday or 2 days ago, klom yesh eved, is there such a thing as an eved who's receiving a bracha from his master and he's busy having a conversation, he's not paying attention to the bracha? You're receiving Birchas Kohanim, you have to pay attention to the bracha. Ois Katam Kuf Yud. This is very interesting. There's an interesting Dirshu footnote on this. What did the Mechaber say? Let's go back into the Mechaber. The Mechaber said, if the Kohen has a mum on his face or on his hands, then if it's a significant mum, he can't duchen because he's going to be a distraction. Then the Mechaber said, V'hu adin, it's 4 lines down in the Mechaber, V'hu adin, the same halacha applies, L'mi sheyesh mumin baraglov, if somebody has a mum on his feet, in a locale where the minig is to go up to the duchen without socks. That's the lashon of the Mechaber. Pay attention to that. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. First of all, the Mishnah Berurah has to define batei shekayim, because batei shekayim could mean different things. We had earlier batei shekayim meant boots. It meant like thigh-high boots. Over here it says, the Mishnah Berurah, what does batei shekayim mean? Hainu ke'en puz mekai shalanu. It's like our socks. Okay. So then what's the Mishnah Berurah saying? The Mishnah Berurah is saying, what's the Mechaber saying? The Mechaber is saying, if a person has a mum on his feet, and it's a place where they're noyig to go up to the duchen without socks, then he can't duchen with the mum on his feet. Why? Because it's going to be visible. Now, a little bit odd. Why did the Mechaber say, if it's a locale where they don't wear socks? Why didn't the Mechaber say, if he's not wearing socks? If a person has a mum on his feet and he's not wearing socks, then he can't duchen. What do I care what the minig HaMokum is? That's not what the Mechaber says. The Mechaber says, if the minig HaMokum is that they don't wear socks, then he can't duchen. What do I care what the minig HaMokum is? L'chayr, if he's wearing socks, you can't see the mum. So say, if he has a mum on his feet and he's not wearing socks, he can't duchen. But if he's wearing socks, he can duchen. So if you want to see the mind of a paisik, there's a Dirshu footnote over here. It's footnote number 118, where they bring down from Rav Moshe, Zechat Tzaddik Kadosh Levracha, from the Igros Moshe. He says like this: if it's a place where the minig is not to wear socks, af im yilbash batei shekayim, even if this kohen will wear socks, Kasa b'shayil setshuvas Igros Moshe shemash b'milosha Shulchan Aruch she'ein zamoyel. You'll see from the Mechaber, if it's a locale with a noyig not to wear socks, then even if this individual kohen does wear socks, he still can't duchen. Why not? Because since in this locale the minig is not to wear socks, right? But Tamad over Kosav, Sha'av Bisha Etzem Levishas Patei Shekaim Enigaremis Listaklos, Kamakam Ayideshil Yilbashem, since this individual kohen is wearing socks in an area where the minig is not to wear socks, Yavin Atzibur Sheyesh Lo Mum, people are going to chap, he must have a mum. V'yavayu lehistakel alav. You know what Rav Moshe is saying? Rav Moshe is saying is the Mechaber was very medoyik. The Mechaber said if it's a locale where the minig is that the Kohanim don't wear socks, that even if the kohen with the mum on his foot wears socks, he still can't duchen. Because people are going to look at him and they say, hey, he's wearing socks. Why is he wearing socks? Ooh, he must have a mum on his feet. I wonder what the mum is. Is he missing 2 toes? Or like what What's going on over there? And now they're not paying attention to Birchas Kohanim. So you see how much you have to be medayik in the lashon of the mechaber. Okay. Ois cotton kuf yod aleph. The mechaber said, "V'im hayodosh be'iroi." If the person who has the mum, if the kohen with the mum is dosh be'iroi, if everybody is accustomed to seeing him in the city, then he could duchen. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Da'atam the mum paisel b'fanav yod v'ragel v'chein b'kol hani, because the reason why a mum pasels the kohen, if he has a mum on his hands, his feet, or his face, hu misham dechayshid, and she is taklubai. It's because we're afraid people are going to look at him as a distraction. If they're accustomed to it, it's not a chiddush. It's not something to look at, so it's not going to be a distraction. Issa b'shas, the Chavetz Chaim brings down from the Gemara in Megillah Chaf Daled Amud Aleph, de poicheach lo yisa es kapav. A poicheach, which means somebody who's wearing torn clothing. And specifically, we saw in the Mishnah Berurah earlier, it means somebody whose clothing are torn so that his forearms and his shoulders are exposed. The gnai hu l'tzibur, not because it's a distraction, because it's a gnai. It's a disgrace. That's the word I'm looking for. It's a disgrace to the tzibur, right? There's kavanat tzibur. You're going up in front of the tzibur. You have to have kavanat tzibur. Somebody to go up with torn clothing with his shoulders exposed. That's a gnai. It's a disgrace to the tzibur. Umaru peicheach. What's a peicheach? Mavor le'el b'simen nun gimel sif yud gimel ayin sham. And if you'll take a look at Dirshu footnote number 120, you'll see what I just said. We brought down earlier that this means that his clothing is torn so that his forearms and shoulders are exposed. Kasav Pri Chodesh writes, the choyle meyayim, somebody who's suffering gastrointestinal distress, lo yisa es kapav, he should not duchen. But he should go out before Ritzei, right? You know what? This is a perfect place for us to go to a biur halacha that actually starts on Zayin Amud Aleph. It's biur halacha dibur hamaschel misha yesh lo mum. So we're saying all of these kohanim that have a mum, they can't duchen. Okay, so they can't duchen. What should they do? Should he just stay in the shul and not go up? So let's take a look here. It says the biur halacha. Ayin Taz Shekasav, the Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the Taz who writes, the Chol Hanu She'enam Noisin Kapayim, all of these individuals that are unable to duchen because they have these afflictions, Tzrichin Leilek Mi Beis HaKnesses B'shas HaDuchen. They have to make sure that they're not in the shul during the time of duchening. Now, what does that mean, that they have to make sure that they're not in the shul in the time of duchening? That means that they have to leave before Ritzei. Because if they're there by Ritzei, it's already noticeable that they're not going to duchen because they're not nekar mimakaimam. Remember, we learned that the kohen has to step out of his place to start approaching the duchen in the middle of the bracha of Ritzei. So these kohanim that are not going to duchen, says the Taz, they got to leave. Why do they have to leave? Says the biur halacha, says the Taz, the loy lemru alav ben grushahu. Because if they stay in the shul, people are going to say he must be a kohen pogum. It must be that he's the son of a divorcee, or the son of someone, a woman who had chalitza or something. He must be a kohen pogum. So we don't want this person's lineage to be denigrated. So therefore we say, you're not going to duchen? Leave. Now we learned earlier that if we say that a kohen has to leave, that means he leaves before Ritzei and he doesn't come back until after Birchas Kohanim. And again, the reason he has to leave before Ritzei is because the kohanim have to be nekru mimakaimam during Ritzei. And he's not going to be nekar mimakaimam because he's not going up to the duchen. So people are going to say right away, he's a kohen pogum. So they got to leave before Ritzei. That's the shita of the Taz. The shita of the Taz is these people have to leave. But the Eliyah Rabbah megamgim bazeh v'chein b'Prima Gadim. The Eliyah Rabbah and the Prima Gadim take issue with this Taz. V'dachu rayosav, and they push away the Taz's rayas. V'chein b'Sefer Nahar Shalom b'Cholik Alav. And the Sefer Nahar Shalom also disagrees with the Taz. Why do they disagree with the Taz? The Chol elu nikarim heim b'muman v'loyasu limite. Why are these people puzzled to duchen? They're puzzled to duchen because they have a conspicuous physical defect. So okay, so in that case it's conspicuous why they're not duchening. No one's going to look at them and say that they're a kohen pogum. people are going to look at them and realize that they're not duchening because they have a conspicuous physical defect. So why are we afraid that people are going to think that their lineage is suspect? And for this reason, you have again the El Yerabah, the Pri Megadim, and the Har Shalom, who all take issue with this Taz. Ulakach, and because of this reason, Sasmo HaPaiskim, the Paiskim are silent as to the question of whether or not the Kohanim have to leave. We just learned the Mechaber, the Ramah, the Mishnah Berurah, they don't just say that the Kohanim have to leave. Ulakach Sasmo HaPaiskim, v'lo yitzvichu eisei lotzes. They don't require these Kohanim to leave. V'chein mashma b'magen Avram Sif Katan Daled Ayin Sham, that the Kohanim don't have to leave. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, Mipnei shalav kuli alma dina gemiri. Unfortunately, we live in times where there's a lot of amaratzos. Not everybody knows the halacha. It could be that because of amaratzos, itaka would be better that these kohanim should go out like the Taz, because even though they have conspicuous physical defects, not everybody knows the halacha that a kohen with conspicuous physical defects doesn't duchen. So they're not going to say that he's not duchening because of the physical defect. They're going to say he's not duchening because his lineage as a kohen is suspect. His yichus is suspect. So the Chavetz Chaim says perhaps we taka should be noyeg like the Taz. Kasav a prichadosh kalhani darminan lo yale. All of these people that we're saying shouldn't go up to the duchen, but if they do go up to the duchen, lo yered. We don't call them down. Once they went up to the duchen, we allow them to duchen. Vayid b'pri begadim in mishpat zeizav ois lamid tes. Now, we just learned in Mishnah Berurah ois katan kuf yud aleph near the end that the person who's a chayla me'ayim, the kohen who's suffering from gastrointestinal distress, he should go out. He doesn't have a conspicuous physical defect. Nobody knows that he's experiencing stomach problems. So that person, taka, has to go out. Okay, now we go to Mishnah Berurah's Katan Kuf Yud Beis. Hailech ba'akroi. We said that a person who lives in a city, once he's in his city for 30 days, people are accustomed to his defect. He's dash be'iroi. He could duchen even with a conspicuous physical defect. Then the Mechaber said, but if somebody's hailech ba'akroi, if somebody happened to go maybe on a vacation to some city for 30 days, he does not become dash be'iroi after 30 days, because it's not Iroi, it's not his city. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it's a very important Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says, why is it that this guy who takes a 30-day vacation in New Hampshire doesn't become dash be'iroi in New Hampshire? Because he doesn't live there. And therefore, he's not involved with people. The words I used were he doesn't become part of the fabric of society. And therefore people don't become accustomed to his mum. Va'ayin bebiur halacha. I don't know if we get a chance to see that be'er halacha. We'll see. Aizkan kuf yud gimel. Kuf yud gimel. So that was the third madrega that the Mechaber gave us. What if somebody isn't going to a city to live there, but he's going there to serve as a malamed, as a sofer, as a laborer, temporarily for 6 months or a year? So the Mechaber said that person does become dash be'iroi after 30 days. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Kuf Yud Gimel, Ella, Tekevin shal kapanim bali hishtakeh sham le'ezas man, since he's going to be there for a significant amount of time, and I dare say, even though I'm putting words in here, but I'm just saying it misvara, he's also going to take up a specific involvement. He is becoming involved in the city. He's becoming a malamed. If you become a malamed, you got to speak to the parents. If you become a malamed, you speak to the other rabbeim. You speak to the staff of the school. People come to the school. They see you in the school. So you have an involvement. It's not just that you took an Airbnb and you're there on vacation. You have an involvement in the city. So in that case, regilim lisa v'litei nimai, people become accustomed to dealing with him. V'hergalu b'mumai b'shloshim yom, and people become accustomed to his mum after 30 days. Before we go to Sif Lamed Aleph, let's do one more biur halacha over here. Biur halacha dibur hamaschel v'chein suma ba'achas me'enov. The Mechaber said somebody is blind, a kohen is blind in one eye, he can't go ahead and he can't duchen. Why? Why not? The fact that he can't see, what's that negeya? So the biur halacha explains what I said when we learned the Mechaber. Pashut tedafke im sam yusay nicker. This is only if the blindness is, so to speak, noticeable. It's visible. What does that mean? There's a defect in the eye. The eye looks wrong. And therefore, if Yavayu l'stakel, so people are going to look at him. But if the fact that he's blind in one eye is not noticeable to people, there are many types of blindnesses where the eye looks like anybody else's eye. Just the vision is not working, but there's nothing, the eye is not noticeably wrong, then mutter, then of course he could do it. There's no reason why he shouldn't be able to do it. Okay, now we go back to the Mechaber, Sif Lamed Aleph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines off the bottom says the Mechaber. And this is a question that I'm sure many people have had since the beginning of the shir today. We're telling you that Kohanim with conspicuous defects on their faces, on their hands, maybe on their feet, can't duchen. Why? Because it's going to be a distraction. Well, that means that people are going to be able to see it. Says the Mechaber, if the minig of the mokim is that the Kohanim cover up their faces and their hands with their talesim, he says al paneim. If the minig is that they cover up their faces with their talesim, afilu yesh befanav ubiyadav kama mumin, then even if they have mumin, he says kapav, then they could takaduchen because you can't see the mumin. Haggah says to Ramah, v'dafkim hayu yadav bifnim min atalis. Of course, if we're going to say that the kohen could duchen even with a mum on his hands, as long as he covers up his face with a talis, that is assuming that not only does he cover his face, but he keeps his hands inside the talis, and his hands are also covered by the talesim. We learned previously 2 different minhagim. We learned one minig that the Kohanim cover their face, but the hands are outside the talesim, and then we had another minig that they cover their face and the hands are inside the talesim. From the Kohanim that I've been polling, it seems that the common minig is that the hands stay under the talesim. So says the Mishnah Berurah Kuf Yud Daled. Im minig, if the minig is that the Kohanim cover up their faces and their hands, then they could duchen even with a mum, because the people can't see. Let's say a kohen is in a locale where it's not the minig to cover up with the talis, but he decides he wants to cover up with a talis because he has a mum. Does that work? No. Aser. That's aser. Why? Even if all the other Kohanim agreed to do the same thing, so that this kohen doesn't look any different. Why? Because the very fact that they're changing the minig is going to be a distraction. This is a little bit of a raya to that Igros Moshe about the socks, right? Even though the kohen with the mum on his foot is covering up his feet with socks, but if he's in a place where the minig is not to wear socks, so then the very fact that he's wearing socks is a distraction, right? It tells people, oh, look, I have a mum. So too over here, if the minig is that the Kohanim do not cover up with talesim, so then if a kohen with a mum decides he's going to cover up with a talis, that itself is going to be a distraction. Even if all the other Kohanim decide to climb on board and do the same thing, that's also going to be a distraction. Oiskan Kuf Tesvav, what did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said if it's the minig hamakim that the Kohanim cover up, then you could duchen even with the mum because you're covered and the people can't see it. How about if it's the minig hamakim that the tzibbur covers up with talesim? Like I dare say in most of our places nowadays, the minig is that the tzibbur covers up with talesim. So they're not going to be able to see the mum because they're covered. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that does not help. The fact that the tzibbur is going to cover up does not help. If they get wind of the fact that there's a kohen with a mum, they're going to want to peek. So the fact that the tzibbur covers up is not going to help. And also you have young people who don't, unmarried single people who don't have talesim. Eiskan kufte zayin liyadav. The Ramah said, of course, this only helps if the Kohanim also cover their hands. Avalamumin shebefanav mahani. In a locale where they cover up their faces but not their hands, so then that will protect Kohanim that have mumim on their faces, and they'll be allowed to duchen, and it will not protect those who have mumim on their hands. They still will not be able to duchen. Ois sif lamed beis, 3 lines from the bottom, says the Mechaber. Hayu yadav tzivuais istis upua. If somebody works in dyeing, maybe he works with textiles and he dyes textiles, or he works in leather and he dyes leather. Maybe he's a shoemaker and he has, shoe black on his, or even a cipher that works at Urtsuis. If his hands are dyed, hayu yadav tzivuais istis upua. Istis upua pirish binei tzavaim. These are different types of dye. Lo yisas kapav. He can't duchen. Same reason. Memnei sha'am mistaklen mehem. Oh, look at that guy with red hands. That's weird. So again, it's going to be a distraction. But qualification, v'em roiv ha'ir malachtan bekach. Back in the day, this was common. You had a town where most of the people in that town worked in the same trade. So let's say there's a town of leather fabricators, and they all work with dye, and all of their hands are colored from dye. So then it's not a distraction. Then it's dush. Then it's no problem. So too, if this guy is the local textile dyer, and everybody's used to seeing him with colored hands, he's not a distraction, and then he can do it. Yisa es kapav. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Kuf Yud Zayin. Mistaklen mehem. Uvemakim shedago ha-kohanim l'shalshal atalf al-pnei v'yedei b'fnim and atalos. Noise kapav v'chen iskela el. Again, in a locale where the kohanim cover their faces and their hands, so then this fellow with dyed hands could duchen. Eiskan Kuf Yud Ches malachton bekach. If most, the Mechaber said, if most of the people of the city do this kind of malacha, so it's very common that the people in the city have dyed hands and everybody's used to it, then it's not a distraction, and then this Kohen keduchen. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is talking about even a newcomer to the city. So he's not dash be'iroi. Yankel Katz, the Kohen, just moved to town a week ago, so he's not there 30 days. But he's got red hands like everybody else has red hands, because most of the people in the city have red hands. So the people of this city are accustomed to seeing people with red hands. So I don't care that Uncle Katz only lives there for 7 days. If we're talking about somebody who's already a Toshav in the city, who lives there for more than 30 days, then I don't need that most of the people in the city do that malacha. It's not negeya. If there's only one textile dyer in the city, but he lives there for 30 days, so then dash be'iroi, people are accustomed to seeing him with are accustomed to seeing him with dyed hands, so he wouldn't be a problem. So the Mishnah Berurah is saying like this: if the Mechaber is giving us a halacha that if most of the people in the city are engaged in that type of work, then a Kohen whose hands are dyed can duchen. It must be we're talking about a Kohen who lives in the city for less than 30 days. And what we're saying is, even though he lives in the city for less than 30 days, since most of the people in that city are textile dyers, so they're used to seeing people with red hands. So he could do it with red hands. If the Kohen lives in the city for more than 30 days, I don't care if most of the people in the city are dyers. It's not negeya. He's a dyer, and people are used to seeing him for 30 days. Okay, let's go to Sif Lam and Gimel. We'll push a little bit ahead. Says the Mechaber. Not ahead. We're still, by the way, one page off of the Dirshu schedule. My hope, I'll just give you a heads up right now, even though my hope is that I'll say an extra share on Friday. I usually don't say share on Friday. I'm going to try to stick in a share on Friday, and that will catch us up to the Dirshu page. We're running one page behind. On the Dirshu schedule, today's Dirshu page is actually Chesam and Aleph. We did Zayin and Beis. But let's push on to Chesam and Aleph. Says the Mechaber Sif Lam and Gimel here on the bottom of Zayin and Beis. Mi she'eino yedei lachtoy ha'oisiyos. Somebody who does not have a good chitoch hadibur. He does not enunciate all of the sounds of the Aleph Beis correctly. Kigoyin, for example, shomer la'alfin einin ula'einin alfin. somebody who says an ayin and an aleph the same. Most Ashkenazim, unfortunately. So, Kigoyin Shomer L'Alef and Ayin Alfin, he pronounces an aleph like an ayin like an aleph, v'kiyoytze b'zeh, or anything else similar to this. Lo yisas kapov. He can't duchen. Okay, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, bottom line, Zayin Amud Beis, Ois Kuf Yutes, She'eni Yadeya, he doesn't know how to enunciate clearly. V'uadin mishu kvad peh ukvad loshain, so to a stutterer or a stammerer, somebody with a conspicuous speech defect, he also can't duchen. Brought down from the Rambam. Ois Katan Guf Chaf La'alfin Ayin. The case of the Mechaber is somebody who pronounces an aleph like an ayin, or an ayin like an aleph. Says the Chavetz Chaim, v'uadin, the same halacha would apply, misha kaire lechesin heyin. If somebody can't pronounce a ches, and instead of pronouncing it as a ches, he doesn't do ch, he pronounces it as a hey. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, instead of echad. That's a problem. Aisha kaire l'shibailas sibailas, or a real litvak, who doesn't say a shin, and instead of a shin, he says a sin. Getzabis. So, the Mishnah Berurah is saying, these are similar to what the Mechaber says, somebody who doesn't differentiate between an aleph and an ayin and an aleph. So this guy doesn't differentiate between a ches and a hey, or between a shin and a sin or a samach. So too, these people, l'chayra, shouldn't be able to duchen. However, qualifies the Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah says, "V'em kol b'nei iroi karen kach." If everybody in the city talks that way, motor lisa kapayim sham ba'isei makom. Then in that locale you can duchen because it's normal. Umitam zeh kasva achrayim, and for this reason the achrayim write, "De bizmanenu," that nowadays sharoiv b'nei ameinu ein yodim lahavchin bein havaras ha'ayin la'alef, where most Yidden don't know how to differentiate between an ayin and an aleph. You don't have to worry that when you say yo'er, you're not differentiating yo'ers with an aleph, and maybe you're making it sound like an ayin. We don't know the difference between an aleph and an ayin, and most of our people don't differentiate between the pronunciation of the aleph of the ayin, and therefore the kohen is allowed to do it. Furthermore, people say, the Medinas Russia, in Russia, Lita, White Russia, where a lot of them didn't pronounce a shin, they made it like a sin. Even though most people know the difference between the shin that has the dot on the right and the sin that has the dot on the left, still, since that's typical and it's common, he's allowed to duchen. Taz, this is brought down from the Taz, and also the Elia Rabbah. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. The source of Limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rabbi Shalom should send Yeshua Sefos Parnasset Shadruchim to all those in need, and we should be Zoichet to see the Bias Kal Tzedek, B'mehera V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.